Brandon. I'm also known as Nimbus in the community. I'm the host of the San Antonio Lisk blockchain meetup. We've had a few of those now, and it's been a blast getting to meet everybody at the meetups. In addition, I'm one of the co-founders of a Lisk delegate group called Lisk Ascend. Our group is to promote delegates who want to use Lisk's forging positions to add value to the Lisk community. So that means folks who want to put together side chains, educational projects, Lisk-related tooling. If they've got the skills to back it up and the desire to move forward, we want to talk to them and hopefully make them part of our team and eventually become Lisk delegates. Now, for these meetups, we've tended to do a good bit of Lisk and a little bit of general blockchain stuff, and today my part is for the general blockchain technology. This is basically kind of the foundations of where the blockchain came from. Most of you know it started with Bitcoin. This is kind of Bitcoin-esque sort of a presentation. It's not really Bitcoin, but this is sort of the technology behind Bitcoin in a general sort of way. And all these other projects out there, at least 90% of them, are building off of this technology and starting to add new features. So it's important to understand the basics before we kind of move on to more advanced stuff like side chains and smart contracts and dApps and all of that. So this presentation, we're going to answer 3 questions. What are blockchains? What's the benefit of blockchains? And how do blockchains work? It's going to be kind of a nitty-gritty into the details. It's not much not much puffery about the promise, but kind of what they do and how they work, what the intent here is. All right, so what is a blockchain? A blockchain is a database of transactions that run on a distributed peer-to-peer network. So when we think of transactions in its most basic form, Bitcoin, some of these early technologies, we're just talking about transferring value. So it could be as easy as like writing a check. Could be kind of a transaction that might be go onto a blockchain. And these different transactions are then they run on a distributed peer-to-peer network. So by distributed, it helps to compare a distributed network to a centralized network. Here we have a picture or a representation of both. Each of these dots you can think of as a computer or maybe a person or entity. In a centralized system, all of the transactions that run on that network or that system have to go through a central point. So if you want data from another node or another person or entity, it's all got to go through a central person. So in distributed networks, that's not the case. Each node can talk to other nodes as well. And so it provides some different qualities for that network. Some of the benefits of distribution are increased data availability. So rather than only being able to get your data from one central entity or person or computer, you can get it from multiple spots. You don't have a centralized point of failure. So if that central entity goes down, then your network has resilience. It's potentially faster. I don't know if anyone's ever been on BitTorrent before, but I always used to love it. If I had like 10 people or so sending me data as opposed to just one, I was able to get what I wanted faster. You have increased data integrity. So with all of these different points having copies of all the data, if any person changes theirs, there's going to be a whole bunch of other copies saying your copy is wrong or why is your copy different. And it also helps with data loss. So if you have somebody loses their data, there's a bunch of other copies as backups as well. So it makes it harder to falsify and gives you some backups. And again, allows for peer-to-peer transactions. You don't have to go to that central point to get your data. Without the middleman, you have the potential for reduced cost or getting things on different terms, maybe more competition. Even if these different nodes want to charge for their services, maybe they're going to be competing with each other as opposed to a central party who might have a monopoly. And with multiple people having the data, you can also have less censorship as well. Right, so that's the first part of what a blockchain is. The next part is it maintains a growing list of chronological records known as blocks. Okay, so think of all these transactions going out. They start to get grouped up into what we call blocks. Blocks generally have kind of a fixed size that they're allowed to have so much data within that block. And then we'll get into it in a minute, but there's some cryptographic sort of magic is performed on that block to lock it down, protect the block, to make it where it's easy to detect if any of the data has been changed. So what type of records, though, are we talking about? And this is one of the great things about blockchain is that your imagination really is the limit to what data you can put on a blockchain, what you can make it work with. The prime example, the earliest example was money and payments, so transferring value in a trustless way. From there, you can start to transfer assets around. There's representation of assets, so potential like ownership of stocks or bonds. We could even get into baskets of stocks and bonds. Rights and obligations could be represented on a blockchain. So, for example, if you take out a loan, maybe your contract gets put on the blockchain and your payments go against a ledger of what you owe, or maybe that contract is divided up. Multiple people now owe part of what you owe, or own part of what you owe, and when you make your one payment, it gets split up to a bunch of different people. There's lots of ways that they're looking at being able to program blockchain. Events can be put on blockchain. So, example, supply chains. When let's say you have a shipment of goods going across the U.S., you might be able to say where it is, at what point in time, what temperature it's at. Maybe that's relevant to whether somebody has met their terms of a contract. If you can put this on the blockchain, as this product's moving across the country in a way that's not modifiable, they can't go back and change the data, then it could, somebody could trust that, yeah, these goods that I got were kept to temperature and went the shortest route, or whatever the terms of the contract were. I won't get into all these, but there's additional things. Copyrights, trademarks are interesting. We have a member who's looking at digital rights management, where musicians will be able to sort of post their ownership of their creative works, and then actually stream it to users who will pay in cryptocurrency and divide that payment up against all the people who were involved, such as the artists, the writers, the recorders, producers, and so forth. They're even talking about chaining some blockchains together. So if someone goes to the doctor and a medical records gets made, maybe those records are kept on a blockchain, but another blockchain's watching that one. And once it sees a medical record get posted, maybe it knows that, hey, some money needs to be paid to the doctor, so we're going to check a different chain for insurance. Does this person have insurance? And different triggers can be staged to trigger payments from insurance, proof of the services and whatnot. All right, so that's what type of records we're talking about. But when I talked about the cryptographic magic, that's really one of the core features of blockchain technologies, is the use of cryptography to secure these records in a way that they can't be changed. You hear people talk about immutability in the blockchain context, and what you're trying to do is, in a lot of the way blockchains are structured, is to try to prevent data from being modified without, or at least make it obvious if it has been modified, so people can trust that data without having to necessarily trust the person who's posting it. So to do that, we use digital signatures and data hashing. The need for digital signatures can be represented in just a simple transaction example here. Here we have Alice, and she wants to pay, I think it's Paul, $20. And so if she were to broadcast that electronically without any other rules, maybe that transaction gets approved by whoever's keeping the records. But we have a problem is because somebody else can come along. In this case, we're going to have Paul and say Alice sends Paul $50. And how does anyone know that Alice approved that or didn't approve it? So we need some more rules to keep someone just from being able to broadcast fraudulent transactions. So we're going to come up with some digital signatures to solve that problem. In the real world, and at least in the past so far, if you wanted to prevent that somebody from writing a false check on your behalf, you would sign your check. So Alice sends Paul $20, and you would sign it. I shouldn't say Alice, but you'd sign it Alice, and the bank would have a copy of your signature, and they could check and see, well, is this actually Alice's signature or not? In the digital world, signatures are just kind of ones and zeros. So we need a signature that people will know that's Alice's signature and not somebody else. But assuming we can come up with that sort of system, we have Paul, if he wants to say Alice sends Paul $50, he has to come up with a signature. And if he can't do that, then his transactions will be declined by whoever's processing the transaction. So how can we create secure signatures, a way for Alice to sign her transactions so nobody can basically pretend that they're her? So that's where public key cryptography comes in. It involves a lot of math, but I think most people can understand the basics of it. With public key cryptography, users generate what's called a public key and a secret key pair. And these are basically two numbers that are sort of ones and zeros. They're mathematically related that give them some properties where you can actually have secure digital signatures. These two different numbers, the public key and the secret key, together can be used to sign documents. To do that, we have what's called sign functions, and we also have verify functions. So a sign function, this is what you do to create a signature to say, hey, I approve this transaction. The sign function takes two variables. One is your message that you're signing. So Alice sends Paul $20. That might be the message that Alice wants to sign. And her other variable she's going to put in is the secret key. And there's a formula that runs that will then spit out her digital signature for that transaction. Now, because the message is one of the variables, if that message changes at all, well, the signature is going to change too. So it's more secure than what you would do on your check, where you sign Alice every time. Your signature is also related to the message that is there. So if anybody changes the message that you're signing, then your signature actually doesn't work for that message, so people can detect whether the message has been changed as well. Now, on the flip side of that, let's say you've signed a message. So somebody has sent you a message, here's my signature on signing the message. Well, how do you know that's good? So what they have is called a verify function. And that function takes three variables. First, it takes the message. So if somebody gives you a message, you put the message into the verify function. You take the signature that they provided you and put that into the verify function. And then instead of the secret key, which Alice doesn't give to anybody, she gives her public key. They can put her public key into this function. And if all of that lines up, if Alice signed this message and she's provided the proper signature, this verify function is going to say true. But let's say the signature gets changed. Well, somebody trying to check that, it would then return false. Or maybe the message gets changed. If they try to verify that message, it would say false as well. So these two together allow people to create secure digital signatures in a way that nobody can pretend to be them, with one exception. And that's what we call the replay attack. So Alice needs to do one more thing to solve this problem. So let me show you the replay attack. I apologize for my computer. I swear that says Alice. Let's say Alice does a transaction that says Alice sends Paul $20, and then she signs it with her public key cryptography, and it says 011011010. Right? If Paul comes along and wants to forge a transaction instead of $20, he says Alice sends Paul $50. He doesn't know the signature for that, because remember, the signature depends on both the message and the secret key. If he changes the message, that signature he knew about before, it doesn't work anymore. So you can't say Alice sends Paul $50, but what he can do, he did say here Alice sends Paul $20. He knows the signature for that. So he could just replay that same transaction over and over and over again. He knows what the signature is for Alice sends Paul $20. So he can just drain Alice $20 at a time just by replaying it. So we had to add another piece of data to what Alice is signing here. So what she needs to do is she has to add a transaction number, or a unique number for every transaction that she posts. And so transaction numbers is one example. So transactions, kind of like on your checkbook, you have check number 1 and check number 2. If she just did that, that would ensure that every transaction that she made was different. And with every transaction she makes being different, she'll never have a signature, or at least within the realm of probability, that it's not going to ever repeat itself twice. And so somebody listening, they'll never hear the right signature for the message. They can't replay anything they've heard before, because each message she'll send in the future will be unique to what she had done in the past. All right, so that's how digital signatures prevent replay attacks. Here's Paul trying to do it. The problem is he just can't come up with the correct signature. And so if you broadcast that to the network, then it would be rejected because it won't verify. He doesn't have the right signature for that transaction. Right, so how does the network process transactions? We talked about, in a distributed network, we have all these different nodes on the network, and they're all trying to process the transactions that people are signing and sending out. So what happens? And we alluded to this earlier, but essentially all these transactions start to get grouped into what we call blocks. And then we put the cryptographic magic on the blocks to make sure that they can't be changed. So before we get to that, when people are listening to the network, they're hearing about all these transactions, and they're keeping their own copy of what the ledger is, what the state of the data is. But sometimes they might miss things, so their copies might actually end up being different from each other. So this first person may have a couple transactions, and the other person may know about a couple transactions, and if they don't all, their copies of the data don't all line up, then how do we know who has the right transaction? And so this is where consensus mechanisms in blockchain comes in. The original consensus mechanism, or at least one of the earliest ones, is called proof of work. And what happens there is the people are instructed to trust the ledgers which have the most work. So I want to do a demonstration of that. But when you hear about people mining, they are part of the consensus mechanism. They're trying to, they're processing transactions. So what miners do is they listen for broadcasted transactions, they group them into blocks, and in the case of proof of work, they try to guess the solution to a really hard math problem. If they do get a solution, they can add a little bonus payment for themselves, which they may or may not get to keep. They broadcast their block, and if their block is ultimately used by the rest of the network, then they get to keep their bonus payment and then any transaction fees. So I want to show you kind of how the mining works real quick. Right? Oh, dude, go on. Include. Okay, so the way we secure these blocks, these groups of transactions, first we want to make sure that nobody can make any changes to them. And so the way we do that is by using something called a hash. And down here at the bottom of this slide, you'll see this long number that starts with BB and ends in 65. It's basically an identifier for a block of data, and it's of a fixed length. So no matter what I do, how long I make this data, that hash is only going to be this long. One of the properties of the hash is that if the data gets changed at all, even small changes, then the hash will be normally completely different. So if you say I take out a piece of data, the hash changes, and it changes, and it changes. So this is a way that if we have a ton of data here, let's say the entire Encyclopedia Britannica, if we did a hash of that, we could have this fixed length number, and if anybody changed one letter in that entire encyclopedia, we would know, hey, wait a minute, something's changed here. So it makes it real easy to detect if any changes have been made. So that gives us kind of immutability. So the next thing, the way we secure these blocks is we start to chain them together. We group a bunch of transactions together, we create a hash for it, and then on our next block, we refer to the hash of the previous block. And we include that in our second block. And on our third block, we include a hash from the block before that. And what that does is if any block changes, anyone tries to make any changes, it makes all the hashes not line up for all blocks in advance of that. So that's kind of how the hashes secure the blocks. But we do talk about proof of work, and that decides which blocks get incorporated into the blockchain. So here we have an example of our blockchain. I'm going to add a couple transactions. Let's put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 transactions. And for proof of work, what they're trying to do is they're trying to come up with a number that when added to the end of our data in the previous hash starts with, say, 4 zeros or 5 zeros. The more zeros we want to start with, the harder it is of a math problem. So we can adjust the difficulty by saying this has to start with more or less zeros. So this nonce here is a number where we're just trying to randomly guess numbers that result in a hash that starts with the right number of zeros. So I can click mine on here, and our computer is keeps running all these different numbers through a hash and saying, okay, we found a hash, a number that when plugged into when hashed together with the data in the previous hash results in a hash that starts with 4 zeros. So we see 0, 0, 0, then 3, 0, and some more. As we can see again that if we change any of our data, all of a sudden our hash changes, and so the solution isn't right. It doesn't start with the right number of zeros. And so that's might be one block. Our next block, we could add some more transactions, and we're going to try to find a nonce that, when hashed together with the data in the previous block hash, results in a hash that starts with the right number of zeros. And so we can mine again, and eventually it'll find, hey, if this 41861 works, if we hash that together with the data in the previous block's hash, we get another hash that starts with the right number of zeros. And of course, if we try to modify an earlier block again, now our hashes don't line up. So that, again, it's how we kind of secure the network. So when people are mining, there's a whole bunch of people out there trying to solve these problems. And the first person who solves that generally has kind of an advantage in getting their block incorporated into the blockchain. And they're most likely to be able to keep the money that they've added to the blockchain as their reward. And it's in most people's benefits just to go with that and take that information and start trying to solve a new problem and a new problem. And we'll see how that works by looking at a double spin problem. So from a user's perspective, we talked about how do you know which chain to trust. And if you see two chains that are the same length, which one are you going to trust? Well, you just keep waiting until one of them gets longer. Once one of them gets a good bit longer, then you know, okay, that one has more work into it, and I can trust that chain. And we can see how that works, again, by looking at the double spin problem. Here we have Paul. At the top, we have a couple of miners at the bottom. And we have Alice here, who Paul's trying to trick. What Paul wants to do is say, hey, Alice, I'm going to pay you $20. And he's going to give her a copy of a blockchain that says, hey, I paid you $20. But he's not going to tell everybody else about that transaction because he wants to spend that $20 twice. So he's going to send fraud, a fake chain to Alice and then not tell the rest of the miners about this transaction so he can spend more than once. So here we have sort of a split where this red block represents Paul's false transaction where he's going to be giving a copy of this to Alice and say, hey, Alice, I paid you $20. But Alice knows to trust a chain with the most amount of work into it. So and these miners below are going to keep trying to solve problems. They're going to keep building, this other copy of the chain. You have multiple people finding solutions to these problems, and this chain is going to keep growing. Now, these people at the bottom, they have a lot more computational power than Paul by himself. This could represent on the bottom thousands of people. And Paul's problem is that he can't keep up with thousands of people solving these problems. And so eventually this bottom chain with the thousands of people mining on it, it's going to get longer and longer and longer. And Paul he can't keep up. So this chain that he's trying to fake Alice with, or defraud Alice with, eventually this chain is so long, she's going to know that, hey, Paul's chain didn't catch up. This other chain's so much longer. He never paid me. Obviously, I'm going to trust the one with the most work in it. And so that's how Alice can prevent being defrauded by Paul. So it kind of shows us when you're looking at a chain, how do you know what to trust? Well, the block is very recent. You may want to wait a little bit until that block gets buried down. That way more and more work is put on top of it. The deeper a block is on a chain, the more statistically improbable is that information would ever change due to a longer version of the chain getting longer. So once a block is 10, 15 blocks deep, you can start to trust that information. Know it's got enough work built on top of it that's never going to change. And you'll see that on exchanges, for crypto exchanges. They'll make you wait so long to get so many confirmations and blocks built on top before they'll actually give you credit for what you've put on the exchange. Right, so that's proof of work. There's other ways that people can figure out how we're going to decide which copy of the chain to rely on and how we're going to process transactions. One's called proof of stake. It depends on who has the most coins. People with the most coins have a greater percentage chance of being able to forge a block. They have delegated proof of stake, which is what Lisk is, and that's essentially coin holders vote on people that they want to be the people who transact on the blocks, or forge the blocks. There's proof of authority, which you might see on some private blockchains, where you basically just say, hey, this guy has authority to do it, and nobody else, so only trust stuff that he's done. You might have proof of weight, so maybe some sort of reputation system, where people have more reputation are the ones who have a higher chance of having their blocks incorporated into a blockchain. Proof of stake time, you'll see that in some of the storage change, like Filecoin, I think, is one that uses that. So if you offer a lot of storage to the network and you've had it on there a long time, maybe you're the person who does it. And there's even other technologies that aren't blockchain at all, like directed acyclic graphs, which is a whole other presentation. So once we understand the basics of the blockchain, we can start to add functionality to it. We can start to program things. You can start to do things like if this, then that. If this money hits that account, then pay some money over here, or this asset gets transferred to this person, pay some money over here, or split this money up and pay a bunch of different people. That opens the way to the smart contracts. You can start to build entire applications around these smart contracts and end up with decentralized applications. And you can even have these blockchains start to interact with each other and then with the outside world as well. So there's a whole lot more that we obviously won't get into in a blockchain 101 speech, but there's just a ton of room for creativity in blockchain. So hopefully that lets you know kind of what are blockchains, what the benefits are, and how at least the basic blockchains work. And that's it. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah. Where is blockchain not helpful?
Where is blockchain? If you do not need, if you don't need a database, blockchain is not helpful. So if you don't need to keep data, it's not helpful. If you trust everybody, you don't need blockchain. So those are kind of the two most obvious areas where a blockchain wouldn't be helpful. So if everybody is used to working together, you trust them 100%, you don't believe they're going to falsify any data, then you don't need a blockchain, because the blockchain is really about allowing the ability to have trustless transactions in a decentralized way.
In capitalistic world, that basically means nowhere.
Maybe nowhere for the sakes, yes, nowhere. Nowhere. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Blockchain is not real-time database, correct?
It's not
Real-time database. It not replaces real-time database.
It is not real time. It depends on the blockchain how fast they're able to process these transactions in a way that becomes immutable. Some technologies take several, half an hour or an hour before you can really say that this is immutable. Some claim to do it in a matter of seconds. So it really depends on the technology and the algorithms they have in place for processing and securing the transactions. Buzz? All right, well, that's it.
So now I'm going to talk about Lisk, and just from a raise a hand and get some people involved. Is how many people have heard about Lisk prior to this presentation? All right, so about half. So mouse died on me. So Lisk Foundation was established in Switzerland in 2016, where they raised over 14,000 Bitcoin in their ICO, or initial coin offering. So how Lisk describes itself is their blockchain application program, which is written in JavaScript, that really allows developers and app commissioners to go and build their own decentralized apps. I know that's a lot of words to take in, so I'm going to show you a little video that's going to explain it a little bit more.
Lisk is a platform on which developers can build, publish, distribute, and monetize their own blockchain applications. A blockchain application looks and feels like a regular application, but it's built on top of a blockchain or decentralized network, rather than hosted and managed by a single entity. However, a number of challenges associated with developing blockchain applications, such as a lack of tooling and frameworks, prevents it from being widely adopted. Lisk aims to remove these obstacles by providing developers with an easy-to-use sidechain development kit to build their own blockchain applications. Each blockchain application runs on top of its own sidechain, a fully customizable blockchain that is connected to Lisk's main chain. And the SDK is completely written in JavaScript, the most commonly used programming language in the world. So, with Lisk, everyone can develop decentralized social networks, messengers, games, exchanges, storage platforms, and much more, without the complexity of developing a blockchain from scratch. Access the power of blockchain with Lisk.
Alright, so what does this all really mean for Lisk? So you saw that they referenced a couple of tools that made up part of the SDK or sidechain development kit. So we have 4 main tools that Lisk has out right now, and any of you guys who have been following Lisk, the past 2 weeks has been a really exciting time. 3 out of these 4 tools have had major releases in the past 2 weeks. So we have Lisk Core, Lisk Elements, Lisk Commander, and Lisk Hub. So I'm first going to talk about Lisk Core. So this is really the brains of Lisk. So any type of information or relevant information about the Lisk network, API endpoints, and delegate forging will be on Lisk Core. So Lisk Core has been worked over the past few years, and finally we have the release of Core 1.0.0, which has had 1,000 commits, thousands of issues solved. It's coming up in a few weeks, which will really help out debug and optimize Lisk's platform and foundation. So now I'm going to go over to Lisk Elements. So Lisk Elements is our JavaScript library. It contains modules of network information that feeds into the core and supports blockchain application creation. We're not currently at that part yet. It will, in the future, is when it will start helping create these side chains or decentralized apps known as dApps. And then what the common user, or most people who hold Lisk, will be very familiar with Lisk Hub. This is the main-facing user interface. So with this, you'll be able to create your own wallet. Lisk also coins it as the Lisk ID, where you can also send and receive tokens. You can also vote for delegates, which I'll talk about more later. And then you can also, in the future, it'll have the functionality to then launch your own sidechain or dApp. And then finally, Lisk Commander. So this is Lisk's command line interface that connects to its Lisk's APIs. So this is what developers would use to then code their sidechains and help launch their own dApps. It also has a different utility around it. Delegates can use this. I use this on the testnet of Lisk to go encrypt my own password for my node to make it a little more secure. So there's a lot of different opportunities around here. But really what I'm trying to get at is all these tools will come and allow you to generate your own white label sidechain, customize your sidechain, and from sidechain turn it into a decentralized application. So I know I've talked a lot about sidechains, and I know Brandon really talked about proof of work, so we haven't really talked about it. So I want to kind of describe what exactly these are. So with Lisk, our main selling point is sidechains. And a sidechain is a blockchain that's separate from its parent chain using a two-way peg. It's offering structure and security and interoperability around with other chains, as well as with the parent chain ecosystem. So essentially they can be operating in parallel. So if I take your eyes to the top of the screen, we have a network that's just a sole network. Everything is on here. You can't see, but because of this projector, but those are also little blocks as well, just in a different color. But so that's going to be a sole network where it has smart contracts on that, which is great. You have the functionality of smart contracts. But some of the pitfalls in this are quite obvious when you start looking into it. So with smart contracts, since you're on one system, if there's a smart contract that has a bad actor, that has bad code, or anything that has negative side effects, it affects the whole chain. And so as a result, the whole network is affected, not just that app, sidechain, or smart contract. Another part is that it's also susceptible to congestion. So this was really apparent earlier this year is CryptoKitties. Everyone jokes it was a big app. It was one of the first major apps that dApps that took the blockchain community by storm. It was so popular that at one point it congested 40% of Ethereum's network, to the point where fees were incredibly high, and it just really kind of put things to a halt. And so that kind of scalability really just isn't there with this type of setup. So now we'll move down to the bottom part of the screen. Kind of talked about, but at top and below there's also some blocks. It's just the coloring's a little off. So we have the main chain, which is the blue chain, and the other ones are right above it, which are invisible. But so as you can see, so the top chain, what it does is it's operating on its own sole network, right? So it doesn't really matter what side chains are doing. If something's a bad actor, it's not going to affect it. But while this is happening, this main chain is also deploying side chains simultaneously without interrupting the network. And these side chains will then be interacting with the main chain to keep record and use that as a hub or the central part of the ecosystem. So, for example, so we're on Lisk, and there's a side chain where, let's just say, I try to create a dApp. My JavaScript probably isn't the best. And I have some code flaws and some serious things happen and it goes wrong. Now, a lot of people could potentially have negative side effects with that, but Lisk wouldn't have to hard fork or change their code or change anything because of that. Only that specific sidechain effect would be affected. The main chains, so the Lisk sidechain, and other sidechains would not be affected in this process, which gives it a greater level of security for that sidechain. What it also allows is for potential app creators to launch their own app and be able to create their own token, which could then be used within the Lisk network, and also interact with the greater Lisk community, and not have to worry about other apps potentially slowing it down or creating a hard fork or other heartaches associated with the top example. And so I know I kind of talked about it, but really what makes Lisk secure? 3 different things. So I know I already talked about Lisk Core. It's the main brains and the foundation and where all the API and what delegates are forging and everything like that. So I won't go too much more into it. Then we have the consensus algorithm. So we're a delegated proof of stake, also known as DPoS, which really, as Brandon alluded to, is how much Lisk you own is really how much stake you have in it. It's assuming that everyone, since you have stake in it, that you have a financial interest, that you're be acting in the best for the network. So what happens is that everyone who has Lisk will then go and decide, since it's the delegated proof of stake, hey, who are the 101 people that I want to represent the system, or represent the network? And what they'll do is they'll stake, or as in vote, their list for a certain top 101. And then those 101 people who are spread out around the world, we have one in this room, will then go and forge. Brandon talked about how often it does his blockchain in real time. Lisk, I believe, is around between 10 and 15 seconds a block, so it's pretty fast with each round. And each round, the delegate gets 4 lists, and each year it kind of goes down by 1. So last year it's 5, this year it's 4, next year it's 3, 2, 1, and then it'll stay at 1. And last is the delegate. I kind of talked about this already. These are just the 101 people who are securing the network for us and making sure that nothing goes wrong. So how to become a delegate? As I talked about, you have to be in the community. You have to get a lot of Lisk tokens to vote for you. I think currently right now it's at least 12.5 million. So it's a very high barrier of entry right now. So it's not something I would take on lightly if you wanted to do this. But it's something like being positive in the Lisk ecosystem and helping out. But really it's just supporting, from our perspective, is just supporting delegates who are out there in the community doing good work, who are going to these events and helping out and doing stuff when even if they're not forging, they're having a positive impact in the Lisk community, and that's what really we need. And so this is all a lot, and just to kind of summarize this, what Lisk at its core is really trying to do is build a better blockchain. So I won't go over all these, I'll just touch on a couple of them. Just a couple quick hitters is with Node.js. JavaScript is the most commonly used programming language in the world. And Lisk is going to be using that. It's going to be one of the few blockchains too, so it's going to have an advantage there. We talked about scalability. Its scalability is unparalleled in the market. It's something that we have a real advantage on others. Then also effortless. All these steps Lisk is taking is really to lower the barrier of entry for you to create decentralized apps. It's trying to make it as easy as possible so that people can go in there and create apps. So what all does this mean? That eventually there's going to be ICOs on the Lisk platform, Lisk main chain utility, and sidechain management. Now I know this is a lot, and I don't want to sit here and keep talking, especially since you guys are in a food coma after the torchies. But so since it's too much for me to cover, Lisk has created something to really help out everyone. And that's why we have the Lisk Academy. So Lisk Academy is a comprehensive and unbiased blockchain educational tool. So it's free and open to everyone, and is for different levels of people, in their blockchain journey, whether you're a beginner or if you're thinking about potentially doing a sidechain. So they utilize they go from blockchain basics to business, and they utilize animations like this one on the screen right now. It's full of detailed content, easy to digest facts, and they have numerous infographics available to use. Excuse me. All right, so now that I gave you a little brief overview of Lisk, I really want to talk, and I've talked about sidechains a lot. I'm going to pass it over to Bob, who's then going to come and talk about a sidechain that we're both pretty excited about.
Okay. So my name is Bob England. I work with Blockspace, and I just have this question right here. So what? So what? Why do I care? What does this have to do with me, right? It's amazing technology. A lot of it makes you go like, I know when I first got into this stuff, I felt like the ape at the beginning of 2001 Space Odyssey. There's like, dun, dun, Bitcoin, ATM, you know, and your life changes as soon as you touch it, you know. And that's me, right? So what? So here's what it is. Blockchain has already pretty much taken the world of finance. It's just upset it completely, okay? And it's also starting to do that in other areas, and one of the biggest ones is real estate. So in real estate, we already know that countries all over the world are taking their title registries and moving them over to the blockchain. Countries like Japan, India, Dubai, Sweden, countries like that we think of as these backward countries like Estonia, Ghana. These countries are already 10 years ahead of us in this technology. In the United States, the big push right now is to take the MLS and put it all on the blockchain. Why? Because it's happening now. It's not happening later. A good example I give is when I first moved to San Antonio, we went and we're looking for apartments and houses and stuff like that. We show up at this house, it's a house that we want, we go, this is the one we want, call them up, we're doing this, right? The guy calls up, you know, we're standing in this living room, that's going to be our new living room, call him up, and, oh, we rented that a week ago. You're standing in somebody else's house. Because the MLS still hadn't updated to tell anybody that it's been rented, it's done. Okay? The blockchain will actually help alleviate that. It'll make things real time. It'll make them start, or pretty close to real time. So it'll start making things happen, right? So take it even further than that. What else can you do with this in real estate, right? So this brings us to one of the side chains, Adapt, which is called, let me just do this. It's called Brikbit. So we already see all this stuff happening. These are all main, this is all off the internet, but it's all main journals. They know it's happening. The city of Chicago has already moved over to the blockchain. So what does all this mean? The move to the blockchain is phenomenal, actually. So the first state in the United States that actually made legislation making it possible to transfer a title over the blockchain was Vermont. And in March, the first title transferred over the blockchain. If anybody's been involved, anybody here involved in real estate at all? Okay, as soon as you're involved in real estate, you realize that there's a reason why there's a 30-day closing. It's mostly to find out what's going on with the title. Who owns this house, right? So they've already done that. Arizona, Delaware, these are all countries. So we start looking at Brikbit, they start seeing all of this, and they have this idea.
Brikbit's intention is to build a global and revolutionary system dedicated to the real estate world based on blockchain and cryptocurrency. The entire software will be internally developed, completely dedicated to final clients and industry operators. Brikbit will be the meeting point of all players in the real estate market and will provide safety without middlemen, reducing costs and allowing the best partners to be part of an innovative real estate project. Join the ICO and contribute to Brikbit to create the real estate of the future.
So what is Brikbit? Brikbit Digital Shares is the first blockchain-based ecosystem that develops and manages entire operations in the real estate industry. What does that mean? So when we look at, So when we look, this is called the value chain. This is basically how value happens in real estate. Okay? You start with some kind of land, maybe you got it from your grandma, or maybe you had to go buy it, right? You have an idea for this land, you're like, I'm going to build an apartment complex. I go on, I have to go through all this management, I have to get, surveyors out there, I got to check out whether or not the property's suitable to build this or that on, and how am I going to do this, how am I going to engineer it. I got to go into the project engineering, I got my architects, I got all those people in there, right? I finally, after all of this, can move on to my contractors, my subcontractors, all those people that actually make this building happen. And you don't get any real value out of it until it gets to this finished product at the end, right? So this whole time, there's tons of money being tied up in this property, with its real value not really showing until the end. If anybody who's actually gone through, and this is what my family mainly does, is they build apartments. They build apartments. They find land that nobody else wants. They re-engineer it and they build apartments on it. So the thing is that anybody who's done that knows that there's a value that you put into it. Say I put $5 million into this project. A year and a half, 2 years later, once it is a viable business, it's working, it's making capital come in, there's rents, and you got the place pretty full. Now this thing is totally likely that this thing's gone up by at least 50%. So $5 million is now $7.5 million. I technically own something that's worth $7.5 million. Do I have access to that money? The only way I'm going to get access to my money is to go take out another loan, which I already did in order to get my first $5 million. I might have taken out a loan here. You might have contractors taking out loans in order to pay their people until they get parts of it finished. So everybody's got loans. Who's the gatekeeper in this thing? Who's the person who says whether or not I get to build a apartment complex? The banks, right? With Brikbit, the idea is to take all of this and tokenize it So that when I have all of these players in this thing, I got my buyers and sellers, I got my investors, I got my bank. Yes, the bank might still be involved in there somehow. The project manager, I got my professionals, I got all these people involved. I can tokenize everything. So I create liquidity. So what's happening is, say I have this, I have my architect, I actually give them a portion or share of this company. I use the tokens to give them part of it through the blockchain. They can, if they need the money, they can exchange it out. They can get cash where they need it, or they could leave it in, and it grows to the final value of the property. It starts being worth the end result when you have a viable business, and not just what they could get. Say I'm going to pay somebody $10,000. That's an easy one to do, right? I know that at the end, it's $10,000 in these tokens. I know at the end it's going to be worth $15,000. So can you start seeing where contractors could say their cost plus 10% can now be, I'm going to leave my 10% on. I own part of this property. It's not just something I did a job and I leave for. And this is the idea behind Brikbit. So let me give you just a case study of what could happen with Brikbit.
Alex is an electrician working in different real estate ventures as a supplier. The enterprise managing one of these projects uses the Brikbit platforms, an ARIDA token representing the new building and the specific real estate venture. Alex understands that payments for his service can be settled as digital tokens of the building. The value of these tokens will grow as the construction proceeds and can be exchanged at any time on designated exchanges. At the end of the construction, the RIDA tokens will give Alex the possibility to make a higher profit, thanks to all services linked to the RIDA tokens.
So there's just one thing. I have contractors that can now create value, greater value. If they can hold off on when they need that cash, the value of what they have actually is going up the entire time with the value of the property. Let's give you another one. How does that affect homeowners? Let's talk about Bruno.
Bruno is a young clerk and he wants to be a homeowner. His savings are not enough to buy an apartment and his job contract is not enough of a guarantee to get a mortgage. He finds out of a real estate enterprise managed and developed on Brikbit. He starts to buy RIDA token as an investor of the enterprise. Once the construction is completed, he opens a smart contract with the company managing the building through the Brikbit sidechain wallet. He starts to buy RIDA tokens to reach the size of the apartment he wants to purchase. After a few years, Bruno becomes the exclusive owner of his apartment. He uses his RIDA tokens to manage his digital real estate income. Create a diversified personal saving fund with RIDA tokens from all the world.
So a home that is done on this system can now be, once it gets to that value, you actually own the home. You actually have value that you can invest elsewhere in other real estate. Think about this. In Houston, I believe that about what you would need to do a residential property investment is looking at like you need at least $20,000 to buy a house to fix up and do something with it. So with Brikbit, I can start investing in property with 40 bucks, say 20 or 20 bucks. I can start investing it with whatever I have, whenever I have it. I can invest in properties all over the world with it. In the case of a homeowner, I can get my stuff a lot quicker, and I'm not paying, 2.5 times the value of my house before I actually pay. I pay the bank for my house long before I ever own my house, right? Here, let's go one. So suppose we're dealing with something like a remodel. Somebody inherits an estate. You know, you get your grandma's house, or my wife a few years ago inherited her mother's house. It was actually inherited by her and her 4 siblings. Okay, there's all kinds of issues that go on whenever 4 people own the same house, especially when one of them still lives in it. Okay, so what do you do with something like that? In some cases, a person could inherit property that is too much for them to hold on to. It has too much maintenance involved. So the only way that they're going to do anything is to sell their home, a place that they have a personal stake in, emotional stake in. Okay, so let's see what could happen with Brikbit.
Carla inherited from her grandparents an historic family house, a wonderful villa. Her income cannot cover the cost of maintenance of the villa, so she hires Dario, a professional in managing real estate enterprises. Dario goes on the Brikbit platform and buys a personalized Rita in brick, so that he has the opportunity to create Rita tokens to involve constructors and investors interested in the renovation of the villa. All players involved receive Rita tokens in exchange of their services. Carla keeps partial ownership of the villa by holding Rita tokens. Through the exchange, international investors can add Rita tokens of the villa to their diversified personal saving account.
So instead of her having inherited something that will crush her, she now has a way of holding on to a lot of that property, but finding other people that will invest in it. Finding a manager who will manage that property and make it of value and manage its value. Okay, so can you start seeing like a platform like this, what it can actually start doing? It can transform communities. You can see those buildings. We have in San Antonio, we have a lot of old buildings owned by the Archdiocese. They don't keep them up anymore. They're graffitied. They're 1930s, 1920s buildings that are beautiful. And they're basically a problem for their neighborhoods because they can't be dealt with. So can you now imagine that that neighborhood could now go on the Brikbit platform? They could actually start themselves investing in it, where they can not only invest in that thing, find people from all over the world that will invest in it, turn it into a prosperous thing that will actually affect the whole neighborhood's value, not just that one property. And this now starts being something that you no longer have to go through the gatekeeper, who's the bank, and because they're always thinking, how many times can I get this person to pay for the same thing? That's exactly how it works. That's how the system works. How many times can I get somebody to pay for the same thing, pay me for the same thing that they already paid me for? Okay? But with this, now it puts it back in the hands of the people that benefit most, the people who own it, the people who can invest in it, and it makes it possible for a lot of people to start working at that plane. So that's what I have to say about Brikbit. You can check it out on brikbit.io. It'll give you a lot more information than I give, including what's coming up in October, where they're actually opening their social media, their social platform, their professional social platform, where professionals will actually start being able to create accounts saying, I'm a contractor, I'm a real estate developer, I'm this, I'm that, and those people can actually start getting together so they can create these things by, I think the plan is by the first quarter of next year, to actually start creating these developments that we're talking about. So thank you very much.
I just want to run through some blockchain updates on the whole industry and then some list specific ones. So for some blockchain news, Goldman Sachs recently has started considering a plan to offer crypto custody for their clients. That way it reduces their risk of them potentially, if they were to lose any of their funds or tokens or anything like that. Coinbase has recently poached a VP from Amazon Web Services to overlook their engineering team. And then also North Carolina has denied a Republican candidate the option to receive campaign donations via Bitcoin, which is kind of a big news, especially in politics. And then some of you guys who are very familiar with the blockchain space knows that Twitter bots are everywhere. Scams, people trying to steal tokens from you, it's just crazy. So Duo Labs posted a report on it, linked here. But one thing I kind of gathered from it is that they kind of talked about how by monitoring the botnet over time, we discover ways that bots evolve to invade details. So Twitter's trying to cut down on this, but they still keep popping up, and they're still prevalent to the fact that Vitalik in his Twitter handle literally says, Vitalik, I don't give away Ethereum. And also, I'm myself very bullish on cryptocurrencies, but also to give you guys, to be real and give you expectations is, Boston College did a study and 56% of ICOs are abandoned within the first 4 months. This could be due to a wide variety of factors. And then also, as of a couple of days ago, there's over 17,000 Ethereum nodes on their network. So now to give some Lisk specific updates, I just want to give a shout out to a member, E1337, who runs State of Lisk reports every week through Lisk USA, and also runs Instagram handle Lisk News. But as I kind of talked about earlier, there's been 3 major releases on Lisk in the past 2 weeks. The first one being the block height announcement for the mainnet migration. So the block height is 6,901,027. It's expected to arrive on August 29th, which is a Wednesday. Now and it would be around 4 a.m. Local time. Now this isn't an exact time because it depends on if there's any missed blocks or anything like that. So this is about the fastest it could come. They expect it to be probably an hour after that, so probably around 5 a.m. And they have what they'll do is they have a precise tracker. So the closer we get to the event, the more precise we'll get. Lisk Commander 1.0 and Lisk Elements have also been released. These are big because all of these need to be compatible with the Lisk Core 1.0, since it's a big change in Lisk's APIs. And then also, Madonna has recently opened up their whitelist sign up, so you can go ahead and get in the pre-order and buy their PAX token. Currently, it's at a fixed price of 50 cents, not US dollars, it'd be the euros. And then also, Lisk Elite opened up the world's first Lisk incubator in China, which is really exciting. It's to be focused on building Lisk decentralized apps. And also, there's 1,700 registered delegates on the network. As I talked about before, there's only 101 that are actually forging, so there's quite a bit of people who are on standby. So now, I know you guys might have questions. I know we've covered a lot over this event, so I'm going to call some past speakers up, and also call up Edward, who's part of the founder of Lisk USA, also known as Stellar Dynamic in the community, to answer some questions if anyone has any. Lights as well. Yeah, it's just, I mean, at this point, all right. So if you guys have any questions, Merle, how can you come up? And Bob, I don't know where you chair. Yeah, you can pull up a chair if you want to sit down. And we also have, we also have Phil here, part of Arrow, who also is here to field questions as well. So just open the floor.
Okay, do sidechains require their own mining network?
So they use the same consensus that Lisk uses, which is the delegated proof of stake. So essentially, you don't have the problem with new mining currencies, you have the problem that there's so much hardware out there that someone could potentially attack your chain because it simply doesn't have enough mining machines going to it. Systems that are launched on delegated proof of stake don't have that problem. It's literally just the stakeholders who vote in the validators. And so really, it actually is a vast improvement on the mining mechanism.
So right now, each sidechain will have its own network of transaction processors.
Okay.
So,
Yes, right now everyone's going to have the same consensus algorithm that Lisk does. In the future, they have talked about making even the consensus mechanism modular, so the sidechain could have proof of work or some other variation of proof of stake, or they'll be able to pick and choose.
And that's assuming that you want that, but the security of the model of Lisk seems to work really well and is highly scalable. So you likely wouldn't want to build an app on a proof of work chain or one of these other ones, although there may be a need or a use for that for some specific application.
So if I want to have sidechain, I have to provide my computer capacity for this chain, correct? Or I can order it from somewhere.
So the voters who hold the token are going to choose the validators who provide the computing capacity.
So I cannot be.
Well, you could, but you'd be competing with the rest of the other people for the votership.
The initial model for launching these sidechains is normally a developer would start out with their own
Yes.
delegates, say 101 of their own nodes, and then they would have their ICO or airdrop, and they distribute tokens. As soon as those token holders get hold of their tokens, they're going to be able to start voting for themselves or other people, and your initial transaction processes, your initial nodes, will then get handed off to the people who are getting voted for by your token holders.
And as the creator, you're the one that's going to distribute the token. So if you want to put a portion of the system in your control in your hands, then you could. Maybe you only distribute 60% of the tokens to the ecosystem and you keep 40, and that leaves you as a minority party in a system that gives you more control. There's a varying degree of control that you could have with it. You could leave it totally decentralized where the voters are the only ones who make decisions in it, or as the development studio yourself, you could keep a portion of it and have a little bit more control over your ecosystem. And I think that makes it more attractive to actual enterprises as opposed to just being a wild west, crypto anarcho-capitalistic system. You could actually set a little bit more rules with this, or you could just distribute all of the tokens and leave it up to the decentralized economy.
And if, for example, I want to create this sidechain and I need these delegates, if nobody will provide this capacity, what the heck have I do?
Well, luckily, the way it works is that you're distributing tokens to provide that work. So people are competing to gain that token. And that's the reason why they want these positions, because if they're in a position, they're going to be gaining your token.
So I can create private repositories.
Well, I mean, eventually, no one's going to trust a decentralized system that's not open source. But you can have certain components of it. Like, for example, there's other approaches, like you could patent certain approaches, and that's the route that certain projects are certainly trying to take now. But yes.
And you use Jenkins for stuff.
Yes, they do. Yeah, Jenkins, and they really are really strict about all of the testing and making sure that
I think I saw a hand back up there a little bit ago.
Yeah, who controls the price per transaction if you're on the side chain?
I'm sorry?
Who controls the price per transaction on the side chain? On this?
Let's look at
The price
On a side chain, who controls
the
the price?
transaction on the side chain?
Yeah.
Well, first and foremost, in the Lisk network right now, they have fixed fees. So the fee has been decided by the code right now. In the future, you could easily have a marketplace where the market decides how much transaction is going to cost, and that's likely where we'll go.
So not the miners specifically. Actually, you should have been more direct. So the miners don't control the price of transaction on Lisk.
No, well, technically they could make a change to it, but it has a fixed limit based on the fact that Lisk is a very new technology. It actually has much more capability to go faster than it's currently allowed to, but there are certain limitations on it so that it doesn't expand too far while it's still being conceived. And so right now, the cost is set by basically the developers set a variable there, and no one has changed it, and that's what we stick with right now. It's 0.1 Lisk. But you could theoretically set that price to anything on your sidechain. You could set it to, one sidechain token, or you could possibly even go with 0 fees. But that tends to encourage spam on a blockchain, and that's one of the things that you have to avoid in order to keep it where everyone can still host a copy of it. Because if it grows too large, the individuals who can host a copy of it will get less and less.
Do you guys have any current ICOs you're planning to launch or no?
Any what?
Do you guys have any current ICOs on the platform that you're planning to launch? Or
Actually, Phil is in the process.
My
He's in
my
the
goal is to
process.
have an ICO like the beginning of October, mid-October, October 18th. So right now we're in the middle of generating our community that we're building, and then we're going to have an airdrop of tokens around end of August, so August, September 1st, and just kind of working through the advisor recommends, and then ICO mid-October through the end of like November, December.
Right.
What's
So
it called?
Arrow, so arrow.io is where we're at right now. So we've got a white paper out there and then our web pages.
And that's where most of the projects are at right now, because the functionality to launch a token isn't currently enabled in Lisk. The prototype that sold Lisk did have functionality, but they've been rebuilding it. So you can't actually launch your own token yet. But they do have quite a number of projects that are already at a really far stage. Like, for example, they already have a completely written white paper, and they're moving into the phases of meeting with lawyers and businesses and whatnot. And we have a few that really are so far along that the founders of Lisk have actually pledged funds that from an account they call the Founders Fund, which is essentially to support these really high-achieving projects that are have dedicated themselves to Lisk. So there is a number of them, including Brikbit, that are really impressive already. That we're just waiting for that functionality.
How do smart contracts work on Lisk, and are those written in JavaScript?
So Lisk isn't a smart contract execution engine at its heart. That's probably going to be more something that will go on sidechains. And that's kind of by design, because if you allow all these smart contracts, like he explained in the sidechain things, if you allow these smart contracts on the main chain, eventually there's going to be a conflict. Somebody's going to write a bad one, and if everybody can submit code to this chain, eventually there will be a bad one. So Lisk doesn't aim to execute smart contracts from its main chain. There'll be something that will probably be executed more on the side chains. Now there actually is some basic, there's a data field that can go with transactions now, and there's a few pieces of the Lisk puzzle that you could still make basic smart contracts out of just by basically putting a piece of information in a transaction and going back to that. But at its heart, Lisk isn't a smart contract platform. It's a platform to launch your own blockchain, which could possibly enforce smart contracts.
Right now, Lisk codes different transaction types. So one transaction type is a vote transaction. So if a voter wanted to vote their tokens, they would sign and broadcast this transaction. Says this is a type 4 vote transaction, and here's the votes that I want to do. So you can kind of see how that might be sort of analogous in some ways to a smart contract. And the sidechain developers, they're going to have the ability to add more transaction types to their sidechain.
And for example, like on the Brikbit platform, the Lisk elements and commanders, what these developers are going to tap into to develop the dApps or oracles that are going to pull this information for that sidechain, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
The commanders kind of it allows the developers to accomplish a lot of sort of coding without having to code it. It's sort of like the shortcuts to writing more code.
So as I understand, the most interesting part of Lisk is sidechain. For what do you use mainnet?
Sorry?
For which goals do you use mainnet of Lisk?
Well, obviously, in order to actually register the smart chains themselves, but also to actually transact in between one side chain and another. In order for them to have interoperability, like let's say maybe you have one side chain that is involved in real estate, and you want to take your value out of that one and put it into another side chain that maybe you play games on or something. Well, you can do that through a centralized authority like an exchange now, but with Lisk you would be able to do this directly through the mothership main chain. And there are some other advantages there too, but that's probably that's the main thing, is that basically Lisk acts as the central hub for the side chains, for this ecosystem of side chains to build interactivity with each other.
Decentralized network of decentralized networks.
Well, when it is true that it comes out from a hub and spoke model, but the consensus mechanisms behind this, which is where all the trust is truly involved. You're right though. It does emerge out into a hub and spoke model, but the consensus is decentralized, and that's what's important.
What about regulation? In the case of your ICO, how do you interact as a platform, but also with the regulatory authorities? How is like your experience right now?
So the recommendation is to run your ICO as it would be regulated by the SEC. So
as a security or?
Yes. Following all the laws, yes.
Even if it is going to be a product or a service that you're going to finalize or share, the recommendation is to follow the SEC, which which is actually you write a letter to them telling your intent. And then there's a couple of exemptions in
My design can kind of aid, because you'll have right now basically only if you want to do it the legit legal way, you have to basically only open it up to accredited investors in the U.S. Well, once the decentralized exchange for Lisk becomes live, and you'll be able to launch your token, you'll be able to sell this token on Lisk's decentralized exchange, and then anyone will be able to invest without being an accredited investor, without revealing their identity even. And so it kind of changes the model, and that's going to probably put some strange pressure on, like, for example, app stores and whatnot. But we're starting to see something interesting that's happening. And there is the question, you know, is Apple going to allow this? Is Android going to allow these apps, right? Well, what we're starting to see is that phone manufacturers are making blockchain phones, exactly like I said, that basically will be open source and for anyone to use, and that will support this, and there won't be any, you know, refusing of these apps, because this phone is capable of doing this stuff. So maybe that maybe we won't need Apple to adopt it, because the people who end up really needing and wanting to get in these type of things will just do something else, get a new phone, get a different phone eventually, you know, that can do this stuff. So, but also I think that Google will probably be a little bit more lenient than Apple in terms of decentralized applications too. So.
And so in the interest of time, I know I don't want to keep you guys here all night. We got time for a couple more questions, one or two, if there are any.
I want to hear more about Arrow. What's Arrow's about?
So basically, Arrow's, our goal is to be Robinhood social crypto. So we've seen a lot of the social networks out there that basically centralize all the information, sell it for themselves, make money off of it, and don't give anything back to the actual creators. So our goal is to basically put the content back to the owners who created it and share that profit sharing with them, and also through advertisements, to do a profit sharing with them through that method as well.
Here's a question for the investors in the room. You know, the current state of the market, I believe blockchain is here to stay, but you have to be able to get to the end of the road, right? So, like, EOS has $4 billion in their war chest. I know that some people in the room want to know what's in this piggy bank right now, so we can get to the end of the road. I do believe with your mission sidechains and the development you've done, you will be one of the winners at the end. But I'll ask the open room question, do we have enough money to get there?
That's well, the good thing is that they actually have a place that you can track the finances for Lisk. I think it's like, it's list.io/finances or something like that?
Yeah.
They actually have like a every 2 or 3 months they do a report on how much is left. And they recently did it. I can't tell you USD numbers because the money fluctuates so much, but it was something around 8,000 Bitcoin cash. It's actually been an embarrassment of riches for Lisk, because over the time where they've been holding Bitcoin, there have been a number of new cryptocurrencies that have come out that have basically distributed themselves to all Bitcoin holders. And by being one of the very largest Bitcoin holders, because of this huge ICO account, they also got these other free currencies. So effectively, they have a few $1 million in Lightball. They have a few $1 million in Stellar. They have they got Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin Gold for free off of the split. And you know, that's on top of the original money that they collected. And then beyond that, they've also shown a really diligent and sound means of, you know, liquidating on time and timing with the Bitcoin market. I don't think it's going to be a problem. I think that we'll make it. We have at least 4 years of funding minimum. I would say it's probably, depending on the market, continues to grow, that we may never have a problem.
So Bitcoin alone, it's probably at least 50 million, and then all these other tokens that they've been gifted on top of that, just adds a lot more to that.
Right. That's at the current market evaluation, which is, as we know, a little depressed somewhere.
Should be enough to keep them going for quite a while.
Yeah.
They've been fairly frugal too. They haven't just gone crazy.
Yeah, they're doing a good job.
Alrighty, well, just want to say thank you everyone for coming. Really appreciate you guys coming out here. Oh, sorry.
No, just like, can we have like your contact list or something, or in case we have further questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
And there's a number of contacts you can get here too, but you can get mine as well. But ours is the easiest, contact liskusa.io. And if you send us an email here, we will answer your question, anything about Lisk. You can also very easily contact the actual headquarters of Lisk. That's one good awesome thing about the Lisk project, is they have a ton of people in marketing and in community management that will get you to the, if you're a developer, they'll get you to, connected to a developer. If you're finance or whatever your interest is, they will communicate with you directly from Berlin. So you also can just contact Lisk.io, their contact as well.
One thing I'll do after the meeting is I'll just, in our meetup, I'll go in a discussion, I'll create a discussion that'll have the contact information, the best way to reach out to us.
Or if anybody like to get hold of me, liskascend.com. We have a link to our Slack channel, and so you can just click on that and talk to me in the Slack. My name is Brandon Glosson. You can also email nimbuslisk@protonmail.com, and I'd be happy to get to know you.
And if you want the inside, come to lisk.chat. I moderate the chat there. These guys are all regulars as well. And I'll give you a real-time answer there. I tend to check in there pretty often because I moderate the chat there. So